Hi, I'm Tracy Lee. I'm the Family Engagement Specialist for Special Education and Student Services at the Virginia Department of Education. You are watching Session 3 of Critical Decision Points for Families of Children with Disabilities. If you've already seen Sessions 1 and 2, you've already heard this, but just in case you're joining us now in the middle for Session 3, I want to talk to you a little bit about why this training was created. The Virginia Board for People with Disabilities, which is another state agency, was receiving information from people that they work with, people with disabilities and families of people with disabilities. And what they were hearing was that people were telling them that there was information about their child's education or about their own education that they needed to know. There was information that they needed to have, and they needed to have that information in time to be able to make the most effective decisions possible regarding theirs or their child's education. The Virginia Board for People with Disabilities had the funding resources, but VDOE, the Virginia Department of Education, had the expertise. So the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities approached VDOE, said they would like to give us a grant, in which they did do that, and then we created this curriculum, Critical Decision Points for Families of Children with Disabilities. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We had many critical decision points trainings scheduled before the COVID-19 pandemic started, and we had to cancel many of those. And while we do want to get them rescheduled, at this point, we just don't know when that's going to happen. So we didn't want parents to have to wait for this information. So we took this whole curriculum and we divided it into 5 different sections, and we're recording them and we're going to put them up on our website. And the one that you are watching today is Session 3 of those 5 trainings. Before we get started, there are a couple of things that we need to address. The first is, I don't know when you're watching this, but it's currently May of 2020. So like many of you, I am working at home and my family is here. So I think they're going to be quiet, but I'm not positive that they're going to be quiet. So I'm going to apologize in advance if they're loud or if they pop up when they're not supposed to. The other thing is this: information in special education can change very rapidly. As of today, every bit of information that I give you is going to be current, but after today, we cannot be guaranteed that that's the case. So if you are reaching this recording after May of 2020, understand that it's possible that information has changed, and the best source for the most accurate and up-to-date information is the Virginia Department of Education website, which you see there. It's doe.virginia.gov. Okay, so today we're going to cover 3 things in this recording. The first one is critical point 1, will an IEP or 504 plan be more appropriate for my child? We're going to talk about key number 9, understanding modification of curriculum versus accommodations. And critical point number 4, where will my child's IEP be implemented? Critical point number 1, if you have this guide in front of you, critical point number 1 is going to be on page 16. If you don't have this guide and would like this guide, at the end of this presentation, you will see my email address and my phone number. You can get in touch with me, and as soon as we are able to get back into our offices, we will put one of these in the mail for you. But in the meantime, also at the end of this presentation, you're going to see a link, and if you go to that link on the DOE website, you can find an accessible version of this guide that you can download yourself or look at online. And you'll also find there 5 animated web-based training modules if you want to take a look at those to get more information. But like I said, we will get these mailed to you just as soon as we can. I just don't know when that will be, but it's free to you. All you have to do is let me know that you'd like one, and we'll get one in the mail when we can. Okay? All right, so critical point number 1 that we're going to talk about today. Will an IEP or a 504 plan be more appropriate for my child? Now, the first thing you need to understand is this is not a decision that a parent gets to make on their own in a vacuum. I've decided that my child will have a 504 plan, so I'm going to notify the school, and that's what they're going to get. What happens is your child's eligibility team, of which you are a part, will make this determination. So you are part of the team that's going to decide this. So in order for you to be an effective member of that team, you need to have all of the information. What is a 504 plan? A 504 plan is based on eligibility on the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is a federal law. And in order to be eligible for a 504 plan, an individual must have a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits a major life activity, such as learning, reading, walking, eating, concentrating, etc. It doesn't have to be one of those listed, but that's a pretty decent list of what we're looking at. A 504 plan may include accommodations and special education services. What is an IEP? An IEP is an individualized education plan, and eligibility for an IEP is based on the 14 categories of eligibility identified under a different federal law. So 504 is under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. An IEP is based upon eligibility identified under the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And in order to be eligible for an IEP, the child's impairment must have an educational impact and require specialized instruction in order for her to qualify. So if a child qualifies for both a 504 and an IEP, services would all be included in the IEP and only one plan would be provided. An IEP provides special education services. What does all that mean? All right, there is the possibility that a child would meet eligibility under 504, okay? We back up here for a second. The individual has a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. And the child's impairment also has an educational impact and requires specialized instruction. So if the child qualifies for a 504 and an IEP, what generally will happen is the child will receive the IEP and everything that would have been included in the 504 will be included in the IEP as well. So they will receive the one document. Now, there are a couple of outliers in Virginia, from what I understand, who do actually provide an IEP and a 504. That is not generally the case, though. Generally, if a child receives or is eligible under 504 and under an IEP, they would receive the IEP, and everything from the 504 would be included in that IEP. Okay? There are a few things to consider here. This is not set in stone necessarily. So your child might have an eligibility meeting and it might be determined that he or she requires a 504. They meet eligibility under 504, but not under an IEP. Well, we might find next year or 2 years from now or 3 years from now that the child maybe now does meet the eligibility under the IDEA, and that child would move from a 504 to an IEP. Or it can happen the other way. Let's say that a child maybe has a hearing impairment, okay? And so that child receives a 504 because let's say that the child has a physical impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. This would be hearing for the child. But it does not have an educational impact. So the child receives a 504 plan. And let's say a few years down the road, maybe the child receives a cochlear implant and now the child can hear. So now the child no longer meets eligibility under 504. So the child did have a 504 plan. The eligibility team might determine a few years from now that they no longer require that. So this is something that can change over time. Just because your child receives a 504 today or an IEP today, that does not mean that next year or 5 years from now that will still be the case. This is something that we will revisit from time to time. When do you want to consider this? At your child's initial eligibility meeting, and then at any other subsequent meetings should a change need to be made. And then here are some questions to ask the school when you as an eligibility team are trying to determine eligibility for a 504 IEP. What impairment or disability was considered when determining whether my child was eligible for accommodations or services? Are there additional areas of need that should be considered for my child? What information will I receive from the school to assist me in understanding if my child is making appropriate progress? When will another meeting be held to review my child's progress and to update the 504 IEP? And if you look in your guide here under critical point 1 on page 16, you will find all of those questions to ask. The reason that we included those under the critical points is because a lot of times parents will tell us that they wanted to participate in the conversation, but they didn't even know what questions to ask. They didn't feel like they even knew enough about what was happening to be able to know what to ask. And so that's why we provided these questions for you. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about today is key number 9, understanding modification of curriculum versus accommodation. This is one of the reasons that this training was created. There were parents who did not understand the difference, and they did not understand that accommodation and modification means 2 completely different things, especially with regard to what diploma a child can earn. Let's talk about this in detail. The words accommodation and modification sound similar, but in special education, they are not. They are completely different. What are they? Accommodations provide adaptations for a child with a disability without setting different expectations. They help support access to the general curriculum. They do not change what is taught. They change the strategies used, or they do not change the strategies used or change how instruction is delivered to children. Children can receive accommodations and be fully prepared for and able to earn a standard or an advanced studies diploma. So what does that mean? Let's say that there is a child who wants to take honors history, and that child is fully capable of learning everything in the honors history curriculum, but maybe the child has dysgraphia, which is a writing disability. What that child is not capable of necessarily is taking notes, okay? So when you have dysgraphia, you have an issue with getting information from here on paper, whether that's through typing or through writing or whatever. So if I'm in honors history and I have difficulty with that, and I'm listening to the teacher teach, by the time it takes me to get the teacher's sentence that the teacher just said down on paper, maybe 5 minutes has passed, and I've missed 5 minutes of instruction because I'm still trying to write down what happened 5 minutes ago. That doesn't mean I can't learn honors history. It means that I have trouble with note taking. So an accommodation for a child with dysgraphia might be hard copies of notes. So instead of making a child sit there and take notes and miss half of the instruction while they're trying to get this information from the teacher into here and down on paper, we tell that child, don't worry about taking notes. Just listen and pay attention. And at the end of class, we're going to hand you a hard copy of these notes. Okay, that's an accommodation. That is a tool that we are providing to a child to help that child to be able to access the general curriculum. We're not changing what is taught. We're not changing the material. We're just providing that child with a tool in order to be able to access that curriculum. That's an accommodation. A modification is something completely different. Modifications require that children with disabilities perform objectives that are different from those from the rest of the class. The content or task may be reduced in depth and complexity. So we're actually changing the curriculum. We are modifying what is being taught. We are reducing it in depth and complexity. If a child is on a modified curriculum, it's very unlikely that he will be able to receive a standard or an advanced studies diploma, limiting post-secondary and employment options. This is really important to understand. If the child is not accessing the general curriculum, if the child is accessing a curriculum that is reduced in depth and complexity, that means that they cannot take the standards of learning tests, which means that they cannot pass those tests to receive verified credits, and they will not be able to earn a standard or an advanced studies diploma. So accommodations are tools to help a child to access the general curriculum. Nothing in the curriculum changes. A modification actually changes the curriculum, and it reduces that curriculum in depth and complexity. So if we're reducing what the child is learning in depth and complexity, they are not learning the standards. They're not accessing the standards of learning for the state of Virginia, and they will not receive a standard or an advanced studies diploma. They'll receive an applied studies diploma. So it's really important for parents to understand. If you have a child who's in first grade, for example, and the IEP team is talking about modifying their curriculum, there might be circumstances under which that is appropriate. But we need to understand that if we're making a decision in first grade to modify a curriculum, it is very unlikely, if we're reducing the depth and complexity of that curriculum in first grade, the chances of our child being able to make all of that up to get a standard diploma when they're in 12th grade is very, very slim. It's somewhere between slim and none. So we have had situations in Virginia in the past where an IEP team maybe has told a parent, your child has Down syndrome. All children with Down syndrome in our school division receive a modified curriculum. Well, that is actually not appropriate because there are children in Virginia with Down syndrome who have received standard diplomas. We do not want to make a decision when a child is really, really small that is going to close the door on a standard diploma unless we know absolutely and without question that it is not going to be possible for this child to earn a standard diploma. We don't want to make a decision on modifying a curriculum simply because our child has a specific disability. You have Down syndrome, therefore you receive a modified curriculum. No, we are going to let the child show us what they can do. And then at some point down the road, if we decide it's appropriate to modify that child's curriculum, then we can. But we do not want to make decisions about modification when a child is really, really small, simply because they have a specific diagnosis. That is not appropriate. So when you hear the word modification, that needs to set off something in your head to start asking questions, okay? Again, we're not saying that it's never appropriate to modify a curriculum. We're saying to understand what it means to modify the curriculum and understand if that is a road that you want to go down. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about in this section is where will my child's IEP be implemented? We are going to talk about something called least restrictive environment. So decisions about your child's placement are made by the IEP team. Again, you're a part of that team. This is not a decision, however, that a parent gets to make on their own. I have decided my child will be placed here. This is an IEP team decision. You are part of that team, so you're one of the people who will be making that decision with your school division. When determining a placement, the IEP team must consider the least restrictive environment, the LRE, and a variety of placement options that will provide your child an appropriate educational program. All right, what does that mean? Here is a continuum of placements from least restrictive to most restrictive. We want every child to be in an environment that is the least restrictive possible where that child can be successful. So that's going to look different for different kids. But the fact of the matter is we want all of them to be in the least restrictive environment that they possibly can and be successful. So the least restrictive environment possible would be a general education classroom without any supports. So that is the class where, you know, all general ed kids are. A lot of children who are in special education are there. It's the general education classroom. There are no supports. There are no accommodations. That is the least restrictive environment possible. The next restrictive after that would be a general education classroom with accommodations. So maybe with hard copies of notes, with extra time for tests, maybe with an aid part of the day. Okay, so general ed without accommodations is least restrictive, and then general education with accommodations or with supports would be the next least restrictive. The next least restrictive after that would be special education classes. Sometimes we call them self-contained classes. And those are classes where there are only children who have disabilities, and the curriculum is very often in those classes modified. Special education schools would be next, private or residential. So the IEP team might determine that we in this school building, we in the school division, we do not have what this child needs. Even in a general ed classroom with supports, or even in a special education classroom, we just don't have what this specific child needs. And so we're going to make an IEP team decision to place that child in a private or residential school that will provide him or her with what they need. The next most restrictive after that would be home-based instruction. Now, underneath home-based there, you see homebound instruction, and we need to talk about what the difference is, because they both take place in the home, but they're both totally different. So let's talk about homebound first. Homebound instruction is instruction that is available to children who are confined for periods that would prevent normal school attendance, whether they're in special education, whether they're in general education, and these are typically medically based decisions. So it doesn't matter. It can be any child in general ed or special ed. Let's say that a child, for example, might have leukemia and they're receiving chemotherapy, which is suppressing their immune system. So it's dangerous for that child to be in a classroom around a bunch of other germy little kids, okay? So medically, a decision has been made that this child needs to be instructed in the home to keep them safe. That's homebound. Okay, that is different from home-based. Home-based instruction is only for children with disabilities, and these are not based on medical decisions. These are based on least restrictive environment decisions. So we as an IEP team have determined this child cannot be well served in a general education classroom. This child cannot be well served in a special education classroom. This child cannot even be well served right now in a private or a residential placement. This child needs to be in his or her home, and the instruction needs to happen there. It is only for children with IEPs. So home-based is only for children with IEPs and special education, and it's based on the least restrictive environment where this child can be successful. Homebound is for any child who needs to be confined to the home for a certain period of time, and generally it's a medically based decision. So that's the difference between home-based and homebound. And then the final most restrictive environment would be instruction in a hospital or an institution, including state facilities such as detention centers. So you might have a child who's hospitalized for mental health reasons, who's hospitalized for physical health reasons, and they have to be educated in the hospital. You might also have children who are in detention centers as a result of something that happened, outside of school. If they are in special education, they still have a right to a free and appropriate education. They just receive theirs in the detention center setting. Now, with this continuum of placements, this is something that's not one and done, like 504 and IEP. We're not going to decide that a child's going to be placed in a private school and then the child might not necessarily be placed there forever. It might be decided at every IEP team meeting for the rest of the child's educational career that the private school is appropriate, but that's fine. But what we're always trying to do is get the child to a less restrictive environment if possible. So the child might be placed in a private school this year, and at next year's IEP meeting, we might determine, he is doing really, really well here. He has learned many tools and many strategies that we think could help him to go back into the public school setting. So we might decide that he will no longer be placed in the private school setting. He will be placed back in public school because now that's the least restrictive environment where he might be better served. That's what we're always trying to do. We are always, if a child is in a more restrictive setting, we're always trying to get them to a less restrictive setting. But that's the continuum of placement. It's important to note, once again, like we talked about with modification and accommodations, in order for your child to graduate with a standard or an advanced studies diploma, your child must be provided access to the general curriculum. Your child should be taught and assessed based on the standards of learning, which are the SOLs, regardless of the setting in which your child receives educational services. Your child may receive supports and accommodations to access the curriculum and content standards. So what that means is this: no matter where your child is placed on that continuum of placement, you as a parent want to ask the question, if you still want the door to remain open to your child receiving a standard or an advanced studies diploma, then you need to ask the question, in this specific placement, is my child going to receive access to the general curriculum? Is the curriculum going to be modified? Because if the curriculum is going to be modified, remember, that means that your child will not earn a standard or an advanced studies diploma. So whenever your child is being placed, you want to make sure you're asking the question, is the curriculum going to be modified? And if the curriculum is going to be modified and they're not going to earn a standard diploma and you're fine with that and the team feels that that's appropriate, that's fine. But if the curriculum is going to be modified and the team does not feel that we need to close the door yet on a standard diploma, then that's an important question for you to ask. You need to know that the child is going to have access to the general curriculum in whichever placement they find themselves. So when do you want to consider this? When you want to consider placement and where your child's IEP is implemented, this says at the first and each subsequent IEP meeting, and that's true, but as a parent, I would say that you want to be considering this all the time. Every day, every week, you want to be asking yourself, is my child in the correct placement? Do we need to put him in a more restrictive placement? Do we need to put him in a less restrictive placement? We want to constantly be assessing this and constantly be asking those questions of ourselves and of our schools. Right. There are many, many questions here that we have said that you can ask the school about IEPs, about where the child's IEP will be implemented. So we're not going to go through all of them, but they are in the guide. And they are the link at the end of this. You'll be able to find them there as well. There are many, many, many questions that can help you to drive the conversation with your IEP team. Pages of them, in fact. So it's important to read through all of these. Okay, so for more information, this is where you can go on our website. Again, you can find this guide in an accessible format. You can download it for yourself, and you also can find the web-based training modules there. I'll leave that there for just a second so you can take a screenshot of that. And if you happened to miss that, or if you have any other questions, here's my contact information. There's my email address. There's my phone number. Even though I'm at home, I'm checking my office messages several times a day. So if you leave me a message on my voicemail, I will get back in touch with you. It's often faster to get in touch with me via email. So if you'd like to send me an email and we can set up a time to talk, we can do that as well. I'm very happy to answer all of your questions. Just get in touch with me and I will look forward to hearing from you. This is the VDOE work group that was charged with creating this curriculum. We had help from many, many outside sources, but this was the core group of people that created this. and you can find all of their information on the VDOE website as well. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.